Yeah, it was really good.
Well, hi. Oh, hi. I'm going to point to everyone. Hi, I'm Christina Baldwin. I'm the artistic director here at the Jungle Theater. I'm here to welcome you and welcome this amazing panel, our moderator, here for the panel discussion tonight. I have just a couple bits of information for you. One is that the Jungle resides on the stolen and occupied ancestral homeland of the Dakota people. Minnesota Makoche, Minnesota has a deep history to tell and many stories to tell, stories belonging not only to the Dakota, but to the Anishinaabe and the many other tribal nations who call this place home. We recognize that this acknowledgement is just the first step, but we start by honoring the truth and the work of Indigenous activists toward a greater recognition that our relationship to the land matters. So with that, I thank you so much. I want to remind you that this is a moderated discussion, and so there won't be audience participation in this part of the panel, but we are excited to get to it. And so with that, I hand it over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all you guys for joining us for the Community Development and Small Business panel. Very excited about this. I'm going to turn it over to these excellent folks in a second. Just going to do some very, very quick introductions and then go to that. Directly to my left is Kaley Brown from the Whittier Alliance. Further to her left, Charise Canales from the Lake Street Council. I'm just going to keep doing the left thing. With me on that. One more to the left, Morgan Luzier from the LynLake Business Association, and then all the way at the end, Taylor Smrikárova from Redesign, Inc. So I will let you guys now introduce yourselves and talk a little bit more about your organization. And Kaley, why don't you kick us off?
Right on. Thanks for being here. My name is Kaley. I am the executive director for Whittier Alliance. Whittier Alliance is one of the 70 different city recognized neighborhood organizations that serve the 82 neighborhoods in Minneapolis. So we serve and work alongside residents, business owners, and property owners. We are super lucky to have an amazing institution like the Jungle Theater in the Whittier neighborhood. For those who don't know the boundaries of Whittier, Lyndale on the west here is the west boundary, Lake Street on the south, I-35W on the east, and Franklin Avenue on the north. The LynLake neighborhood or community includes 4 city recognized neighborhoods in that Lyndale Lake intersection, just so you kind of have your bearings there. Whittier is one of the largest neighborhoods in the city. We have about 15,000 residents that live in those boundaries. We have also one of the most diverse neighborhoods in terms of race, ethnicity, backgrounds. We also have about 85% of our neighbors are renters here in Whittier, so really densely populated. Very relevant to this discussion. As folks know, this area has had a lot of new development coming through the last few years. Our organization is governed by a group of volunteers, mostly residents, but also a few small business owners, nonprofit representatives that work together to kind of guide our organization's community work and to support our small staff team. We've got about 4 folks on staff. What else here? Some folks may know Whittier Alliance from some projects that we've been involved in over the years. The creation of the Whittier International School at 26th and Grand, the Eat Street branding for Nicollet Avenue. Whittier Alliance was a big part of that many years ago and still is today. We do a lot of voter registration and census efforts, plan free community events, work with small businesses. I work with all the folks on the panel here in a number of different ways. And you know, in more recent years, external factors have really necessitated that we take a more direct role in spending our time and energy on combating displacement for both residents and small businesses. So I'm glad to be a part of the conversation today.
Thanks so much, Charise. Take it
Yes,
away.
thank you, and good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Charise Canales. I'm the manager of placemaking and activation at Lake Street Council. And so Lake Street Council essentially is a business association. We serve the 2,000 businesses that make up the Lake Street corridor, all 6 miles of it. And 70% of those businesses are BIPOC owned or led. So it's a really special corridor to be able to serve. And you know, what we really work on is supporting our entrepreneurs, beautifying our public realm and streetscape, and serving as advocates for our commercial community, because we really want to enhance the vibrancy of Lake Street and to help it to really thrive. At its simplest form, Lake Street Council is a connector and convener, whether it's from our business engagement team that works directly with our business community on technical assistance or navigating different grant programs to keep businesses open and thriving. And we're able to provide support to our business community in English, Spanish, and Somali, and so that has been a big priority over the last few years as our community continues to diversify. We also really focus on investment. We run a number of grant programs for our businesses, whether it's pre-development funds or acquisition funds. I manage a placemaking fund for murals and activation projects, but really trying to make sure that we have resources for our businesses to go from renter to owner to really make sure that patrons are coming back to the corridor and shopping locally. We also focus a lot on safety and livability. We hear from our business community that safety is our #1 priority. And so Lake Street Council is starting to work on some community safety initiatives that we hope all of you will become a part of as well. We focus a lot on marketing and storytelling. Lake Street Council, we are the biggest cheerleaders of this corridor. We love to be able to share stories of success of these immigrant entrepreneurs that have made Lake Street their home. We love being able to highlight and celebrate the different cultures that are here, and you know, let people know that businesses are open and to keep coming back. From my realm, I focus on placemaking and activation, and so one of the things that I find really special is being able to connect business members that maybe they've been experiencing tagging issues at their property and are continuing to get cited by the city and are really struggling with that. And then I can connect them to artists that can not only beautify their facade with a mural, but also be able to make that connection to tell the story of the business in a really artistic way. And so that's something that we're starting to see a lot more of along the corridor. And finally, we work on a lot of strategic initiatives around sustainability and around advocacy at the city, county, and state level. So right now we're working on a corridor recovery bill with the state legislature to really make a generational investment in this community that has historically been marginalized and disinvested in. So overall, you know, Lake Street touches so many beautiful communities, and so Lake Street Council, we're focused on the entire corridor and really making sure that everyone can enjoy a healthy, vibrant corridor.
Amazing. My name is Morgan Luzier, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the LynLake Business Association. So the Business Association is charged with the task of uplifting the LynLake neighborhood, the LynLake corridor, which is a big challenge because
It's mostly small business people, and by small I mean 1 or 2 business owners, which I think can get a little bit confusing because when we hear about small business in the press, usually they're talking about 50 or 100 employees, but I'm talking like mom and pop shops. That's really who thrives in LynLake. And our independence is our strength, but it's also our Achilles heel because it's really hard to organize small business people. So, you know, with the help of other organizations, we do all right, but a lot of the events of the recent past have shown that there's a little bit of a gap in galvanizing small business communities. You know, we're just used to doing everything on our own, and so, you know, when we try to come together, it's really quite challenging, even in the face of catastrophe or fear or disaster. But, you know, we do the best we can. We put on a few big events. Our biggest is the LynLake Street Art Show, which is, you know, we invite about 100 muralists from around the country to put up art on the buildings in LynLake and really just try to promote the neighborhood being safe and walkable and open for business. Most importantly, we just try to look out for each other, you know, helping neighboring businesses know each other, have each other's contact information. I know it seems really simple, but again, we're so independent, you could go a decade with not even knowing who your neighbor is. So we really try to push that. You know, fill vacant street fronts, coordinate with developers to try to have, you know, developments that uplift the neighborhood. And then in my normal life, I'm a small business owner. So I'm doing the LynLake Business Association kind of as a volunteer, you know, aspect of my life, but I own a small business, so my lens is as a small business person. So I have a fitness studio in LynLake. I've been here for almost 20 years, and it's like, I think, the best neighborhood ever. So yeah, being a part of the LynLake Business Association has been really gratifying. Yeah, and that's it.
Hi everyone, my name is Taylor Smrikárova. I'm the Director of Property Development at Redesign, Inc. That is a community development corporation that serves the Seward and Longfellow neighborhoods, which are further east than current neighborhood, but we do cover a portion of Lake Street, East Lake Street, essentially where Minnehaha and Lake coincide. We start at Franklin and then go all the way down to the Minnehaha Falls, and then we go all the way to the river. So it's a pizza slice of space that we cover. And so in that service area, we focus on affordable real estate development, affordable commercial and affordable housing. We do brokerage, we do small business technical assistance, so a lot of programs that Lake Street Council puts on. We also can support through city contracts, and we try to do what we can to ensure that the neighborhoods that we serve are successful. They are quite diverse as well. We have a lot of small businesses, BIPOC-owned businesses, a lot of women-led businesses, and my job primarily is to work on recovery and rebuilding of the properties damaged in the civil unrest of the murder of George Floyd by Minneapolis police. And so those projects are all equitable development, meaning that we're partnering with first-time developers, emerging developers, with persons of color who own small businesses, and then also trying to own property that was previously damaged. And so quite a big lift, but it was what we feel a natural response to the events of 2020, a way to recover by doing something different, involving folks that usually are left behind in the process, and sort of teaching as we're doing. And so there's about 4 sizable buildings at that intersection that I'm working to rebuild in partnership. So one day that area will come back online and be better than it was before, and I support all of the efforts to do so up and down Lake Street. I can only focus on the one part. And I live near Whittier. I don't live in Whittier. I think my neighborhood's pretty cool too, but I can't be as glowing of my neighborhood as these folks have been. So happy to be here.
Great. So for the second question, Charisse, we'll start with you here. You know, thinking about, and really like, this is one that ties in really well to the show, 5, which is one of the reasons we're all here. You know, thinking about intersectional approaches to community development, what would you say positive development looks like to both you and the communities you represent?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so positive development, it has to be community-based, it has to be community-led. I think that's really core. I think it's incredibly important that we continue to center community engagement in redevelopment efforts, so that we really understand the needs and visions of our community, and then are able to match resources and decision making to guide that moving forward in the corridor's recovery. And I think a lot of that in all of our work is built through relationship building, really knowing who your neighbor is, as you were saying. What are their unique needs? What do they need to be successful and to really thrive? So that's something that we have to continue to center when we're talking about positive development. It's also about keeping property in local hands. That is absolutely key, and you know, great examples of that are the Coliseum project that Taylor and her team are redeveloping, and I will let you speak to that more. And also Project for Pride in Living with redeveloping the Wells Fargo site. You know, looking at opportunities for local ownership or commercial condos. You know, we want to make sure that we are building capacity in our business community where they can go from renting to owning. So in the play, you know, unfortunately, you know, I won't spoil too much, but because I know some people haven't seen it yet. But part of the core story is that the 2 fathers, they weren't able to own their store until they passed. And so not having to wait until something like that happens, but being able to build in the capacity early on so that people can really own their businesses or own their property and get more of that stability so that they can set down roots. I would also say positive development is about, at least in our context of Lake Street, it has been about bringing back the entrepreneurs that had to temporarily close during civil unrest. You know, Lake Street Council was really grateful for the community mobilizing and helping to fundraise with the We Love Lake Street campaign. And so we were able to help 500 businesses reopen and come back. And so that has been absolutely key to making sure that we're not having gentrification coming through with out-of-state developers coming in and buying up all this property, but getting people back to where they were operating. We want to make sure that we're ensuring affordability as the corridor is redeveloping. Again, making sure that businesses aren't displaced by high rents or changes in property ownership. And then from my perspective, in the placemaking realm, positive development is about being able to highlight the stories of the community that's here. There is such a rich cultural fabric on Lake Street, and for us to have the opportunity to tell those stories and really celebrate all of the diverse voices that are represented here is really important. And we also, you know, we want to work with artists and creatives to use their unique assets and skills to be able to tell those stories and enhance the vibrancy of the corridor. because in the long run, it's about strengthening the connections between people and places to cultivate a strong sense of community that will help these stories like in the play in 5, make sure that they could be successful in the long term. Which way does it go?
Should we just
Yeah.
Are we going in order? Okay.
Yeah.
So the first 10 years that I was in business, there was no development in LynLake or even in Uptown. It was just, the market was bad. I didn't even understand what development was. And then between 2010 and 2020, everything changed. It was like explosive development. And being a small business owner in the community and watching the world change around me, I was compelled to get involved. And really it's just, and this is kind of a call to arms for everybody, is to pay attention. I think that positive development is development that is directed by the people that live in the community. And so it's as simple as paying attention, whether it's like getting an email from your council person or reading the flyer that comes in the mailbox that says something's happening in your neighborhood and we want your opinion about it. That's our opportunity to engage, and I think that begets positive development because it's like of the people, exactly what Charise was talking about. And my biggest learning in that 10 years of explosive growth is that great places are made. They don't just happen. And that's the whole idea behind placemaking, is that, the public realm, the streets, the sidewalks, those are ours collectively. Like what a developer does on a piece of their property, of course there's like city planning and policy that we can impact that helps to make that a better development, but ultimately it has to be economically viable, for the developer. So sometimes it's not the Taj Mahal that we want it to be, but the public realm, the streets, the sidewalks, the parks, that's where I really feel like we can make an impact and own those spaces. Like they say, the spaces between the places, that's where we can really create like intimate places within our neighborhoods that I think they beget better development in the long run, because I think it encourages developers and inspires developers to do a better job in the community when it's really involved. So that's kind of my take on like how you get positive development by being a part of it, being involved with it.
Yeah, I think those are really great answers. So for me, positive development is, I think in numbers, and I also understand the people that go into those numbers that are going to be living in that space after the money's been spent or the project is done. But for me, it's density, and when I think of density, I just mean more space for more people, but that also means the acceptance that there will be more people. So it cannot be this stagnant, the community is as it always was, and I will live and die here and it'll look the same the whole time. The idea that you have a thriving community that attracts economies and that stays vibrant and that does well means that there will be constant change, but that there will be more people. And so the things that I try to build and engage with are welcoming to people, that are inviting to people, and that make space for all kinds of people, because you just can't have empty streets. You can't have ghost towns. You can't have a dense sort of neighborhood of homes and nowhere to shop. You shouldn't have to go into the suburbs to do all of your shopping. Things of that nature just feel natural, and so if the goal is to have more people and to have more density, you should be a part of deciding what that looks like, because it's not just the same building over and over again in every neighborhood. It can be different. Because of where we are in the capitalist cycle, it does have to make money. It doesn't have to make a lot of money, but it has to make some money. So helping to decide who is going to spend that money or make that money, who's going to be attracted to that, that is the responsibility of those that live near or that would come be a part of it. And so that to me is just making city life fun, to be able to have events and festivals and experiences. People are just walking around, being with each other and sort of enjoying life. You can't have that if you just have sort of blank empty spaces and empty fields. So that to me is very positive. It's having diverse folks a part of the process, having diverse folks owning the buildings, having diverse folks in the buildings.
I agree with all of the things that have been said. I think the one thing that I would add, for me, when I think of the concept of positive development, I think the critical factor is really kind of the question of who is ultimately benefiting from the investment. And, you know, what does the process look like by which that project comes to fruition? How is the community involved in the process? Is it, you know, early on when the project concept is just forming and there's actually a meaningful opportunity for community to influence the outcome, or is it all the way at the very end of the project and it's a, you know, a box check where, you know, there actually probably isn't a lot of appetite to incorporate community feedback at that point? What are the business practices of the folks proposing the development? Are they paying fair wages to the construction workers actually building the project? Are they, do they subcontract with companies who are owned by people of color or folks that own, you know, companies that work in the development field that are historically underrepresented, people of color, women? Are they a company who is going to get involved with and sort of become a part of the existing community fabric, or are they just simply looking at our neighborhood as, you know, something to benefit from financially? And so those are kind of some of the things that I think about. And, you know, I think that there's a lot of really good examples of that happening in the last few years, and I'm really excited for that.
Great. Those were really good answers. Morgan, we'll start with you on this one. How have you and your organization really felt the effects of the last 3 years?
I think I touched on that in my intro. I think the chaos of the last 3 years, the uncertainty, a lot of fear, showed the small business community where the gaps are, you know, communication, knowing your neighbor. And then I think the community at large got to see the reality of small business, which is usually 1 or 2 pay periods away from collapse. And that when things are moving along in a predictable way, small businesses can survive because of the predictability. But when something catastrophic happens, there's no reserve, usually, just a little bit. And I think that we've always known that, small businesses have always known that, but I don't know that the community at large realized that where small business tends to be on a bit of a precipice. And this talk of community-owned assets is new, in my opinion is new. I had not even heard of it before the events of the past 3 years. But now this is like a paradigm shift for me, the idea that, of course it's important if small business owners own their asset, which is usually their building. You can own the business, but to own the brick and mortar gives you more stability in the face of this, unpredictability. And so to have the policymakers and developers and community leaders talking about this new paradigm in which people who previously could not own their own property would potentially have the opportunity to, whether it's as an individual or as a collective. And so I feel like that new paradigm is new in the last few years. And I'm excited to see how it will unfold, because again, it's really new. And that kind of goes back to what I said earlier about small business people just used to doing it on our own. And now I think there's like a community shift towards community and leadership, like at the city, the state, the county. There's a shift to find ways to make small business owners and business associations stronger and more resilient. So if something unpredictable happens again, we have more like lifeblood. We don't need as much bailout, so to speak. Yeah, I think that's it. And just like reiterating, a lot of that's policy change, it's, we're changing our ideas, but then having the policy at the city, state, or county level support these ideas, I think is really important. So again, that's kind of the paying attention piece. If you want something to happen on the ground, the grassroots level, you've got to get the support from the leadership at state, county, city.
Taylor, take it away.
Okay. So I would say in the last 3 years, there's been change and there's been some not so change. So the disinvestment in small businesses or certain parts of town predates the events of the 2020s. So there was already, as was described, there's always been this tension and struggle to continue month by month or week by week. So that existed, and it was exasperated during the events of 2020. And then I think there was also this international uprising that started out of our humble town, and that really was built on decades of institutional issues. And after that happened, over the last 3 years, I feel like we can say it now. We can name it and we can talk about it, and you can describe events and call them exactly what they are, and that's not solving it, it's not deleting it, but it wasn't, you really couldn't walk into a room and call something a outcome of institutional racism, or talk about how there was money spent, but for some reason women and people of color didn't get that money. You couldn't say that outright in development spaces, and again, we haven't solved those problems, and it still kind of turns some faces and some heads when you do say it, but you can say it now, and there is some recognition that one might be true, but more importantly, that your lived experience is not the same as your neighbors, despite them being your neighbor for decades on end. And I think that came out in the series of elections, both our local ones and our national ones. But there was basically this sort of aha moment, since we were all here witnessing all the things, all the buildings on fire, all of the National Guard presence, all of the news coverage that was covered internally in our city and then externally and then fed back to us. So we all experienced that together, and then we began to experience how nothing else was the same. And so that duality, that the fact that you could walk down the street and not understand that the person that owns that building has a completely different set of values and experiences than you do when you walk into the building, and both are true. That, I don't think that we really were truly aware of that before 2020, and that does go into how policies are made and how development is continuing, because it is one place. We do have one city, Twin Cities, but we have one place, so every building cannot solve every problem, But at least now it should not be shocking if you walk into a building and maybe everything isn't catered to you, and that's okay. So that was generally what my experience was.
Thanks for that, Taylor. I think I would add that I think the last few years have really proven on a broader scale what those of us doing community work kind of already knew, which is something Morgan named, and that there is just really significant vulnerability for folks, both commercial and residential, who do not have full control over their space through ownership. And that's kind of something that we see play out in the play 5. You know, there were many property owners in Minneapolis who sustained damage, and they were able to fall back on, you know, their insurance policies to recoup losses. Maybe they had built up some generational wealth, but it really didn't take them all the way under. But a lot of the small businesses that were renting spaces on Lake Street, and, you know, other corridors that sustained damage as well, they didn't have that same opportunity. A lot of them are still struggling. A lot of them were never able to reopen their business. And so, you know, I think today and in the years ahead, we know there's going to be a lot more development coming through Whittier neighborhood, through Lake Street corridor, and, you know, there's going to be more density. Taylor touched on that a little bit. And I think for us at Whittier Alliance, we're really thinking about how to open up more avenues for the community to influence and control parcels that likely have redevelopment on the horizon. A couple of things that we've been doing in that vein: we purchased a vacant lot on 21st and Nicollet on the north end of the neighborhood, with the idea of putting together a group of community members to lead the process, to ultimately figure out how we might rebuild something on that space that truly brings community benefit in a number of ways. You know, having that certainty and having that control over even just a little small parcel of the neighborhood is kind of a way to start to kind of reclaim that power for neighbors to really, you know, decide the future of our community. We are working through the community engagement process with the Kmart site redevelopment, which we know is going to bring massive change to this area, you know, in the years ahead. And so really centering community voices on the front end of this process, rather than later down the road after, you know, the parcels have already been sold to developers and, you know, the leverage changes in that situation. But really what we're just kind of trying to do is to build up the capacity of our neighbors to understand the development process on the back end, to really be able to get what those tensions are for the developers as far as trade-offs. And, you know, Morgan said, you know, we're not going to be able to get the Taj Mahal in every project, but like really helping community members figure out how to pinpoint what pieces of a new project could really impact and improve their quality of life, and then effectively advocating for those things is what we've been trying to do.
I think my colleagues really hit the nail on the head with this one, and I would just add, you know, Lake Street was hit disproportionately by these compounding traumas. We saw that in action, and while a lot of businesses were able to reopen with all of the support that was generated from community mobilizing, a lot of businesses are still struggling. I think Kaley said it best. You know, they're struggling to find workforce. They're struggling with increased costs from supply chain and from inflation. Just trying to keep the doors open. And then I think one of the biggest challenges that they're still facing is battling the negative perceptions around Lake Street that have continued. And last week I was talking with some folks from Arts and Rec, and you know, we were really excited about some really good news coverage that came out about Uptown recently. And you know, it's so few and far between times that we get to hear those stories, and I think the media is starting to see Lake Street as this place of opportunity. So that is something that we're always focused on. And for the folks that, we'll hear say that, Uptown is completely empty, or, with the negative perceptions, we challenge them. Have you been here in the last couple of years? There's so much opportunity now, and while a lot of our national chains may have left, we still have those locally owned kind of mom and pop stores that are staying here as anchors. So I think that's something that we really continue to highlight as we're moving into recovery. Another thing that we're seeing over the last few years as a big change, from my perspective, all of the beautification work, all the murals that have been added to Lake Street Corridor, we were able to fund, I think we're over 40 murals now along Lake Street, and then there were other programs that were able to fund those, like the Mortensen Triple R program. But as you walk, drive, bike down Lake Street, even for someone who my entire job is around looking at murals, and we are developing a Lake Street mural tour coming soon, I still find new murals all the time. So I think it speaks to the creativity and the energy that's here. In the artist community, people want to leave their mark on Lake Street now. This is, it's one of the most artistic corridors in the city. And so, being able to continue moving on that energy as we move forward will be really important. Also, with Uptown, some of the opportunity that is created when, stores have since closed. Like the H&M has a pop-up skate park. It's a temporary activation, but it spurs these opportunities for out-of-the-box creative thinking about how we get people to enjoy our spaces. We have new businesses like Arts and Rec that came through, and that's going to be such a great anchor for Uptown to have the rooftop and completely art-infused design in the restaurant and mini golf. If you haven't been, highly recommend it. But it reminds me of Detroit. That city, it declared bankruptcy, it shrunk by 60%, and now it is one of the shining examples in the community development realm of opportunities for innovation as we recover. And so I'm really excited for Lake Street to continue that, and excited to work with my colleagues on it.
Excellent. Final question here. Taylor, we'll start with you. What does an equitable future for LynLake, Lake Street, Minneapolis as a whole look like?
So in my world, equitable has to do with equity. It has to do with, financing and who is signing for debt, who is bringing cash to the table, and who is getting income in returns. And all that to say that who is in charge and who is benefiting. And so in my view, equitable development would mean that there are more emerging developers. Maybe it's their first or second time doing it. There are more partnerships. So there are ways to raise funds together. There are ways to use programs in combination with each other. But there are more diverse people in positions of power for buildings. And then there are, the community will be able to walk down the street past these buildings and know who owns them, and know that the person that owns them might look more like them, or might look like, a woman, or something a little different than they had before. And equity means that there's a possibility of leaving generational wealth. And so that's not cash in your pocket today. That's maybe not even cash in your grandchild's pocket in the future, but it does mean that you are a part of what happens and you have a say, and you can listen when maybe others would have no choice but to go by the bank or the book or whatever it is that's driving it. You have to deal with that. You do have to spend money and you do have to answer to, the economy, but at least the person that's doing that might lend an ear to their neighbor because they were their neighbor. And that's not to rag on very large for-profit development companies because you need a mixture of both, but equitable development means there are more people at different parts of the process over long term, so that when things like at least the next pandemic happens, that's going to happen. Hopefully we don't have another uprising happen, but when the next pandemic happens, then at least there's a conversation to be had about what to expect, and sort of how to work through those things. And even if you can't do anything different, you can't let someone be in your building for 6 months without paying rent. You do have to eventually evict them. That is a process that everyone will be a part of, and it'll feel differently. Won't feel good, but it'll feel differently because it doesn't feel like there's a blind, just blanket, unknown force that is controlling this much space in your neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And so I'm excited about that future, about those projects where there is equity that's being shared. There are ways for community to have equity and have actual ownership of spaces and of property. It's complicated. It's not straightforward. It's innovative. Mm-hmm. But that feeling that you are a part of something, that you understand how something is happening, it's different. It's different than assuming. It's different than guessing the worst. It's different than sort of villainizing the other. It's very much a place of, wow, I didn't realize that's what it took to develop that building. I don't want to own the building, but I know my neighbor does, and I support that they own that building, and that makes me feel good. And then you go about your merry way, you pop in to buy some milk and bread, and you keep living, right? So that you become a very much active member of your community with the knowledge that there are things happening behind the scenes that are doing it in a different way. So.
I love that, Taylor.
I do too. Mic drop.
Yeah, mic drop. Oh, wow. I think a couple other things that come to mind for me when thinking about sort of an equitable future, I mean, at a really basic level, for me, it's, community members that have made this community, this city, the amazing place that it is over the decades. They have the ability to, choose where they want to live, where they want to run their business, and not be sort of forced one way or another by these external market forces. And people should have that opportunity not just to live or work somewhere, but also to thrive. So I think there's a lot of different ways that can play out, but of course, generational wealth, access to wealth building opportunities that weren't there before, that's a very basic starting point. And I think, just at the macro level, Minneapolis, Minnesota has a ton of disparities in the state that we all know and we hear about. And, if those are finally addressed, eliminated, schools, health outcomes, wage, wealth, quality of life, all these things, there's high-level policy solutions and grassroots community solutions that I think, all need to work together. There's a role for all of us to play in getting there. And I think what I've learned, and I think we have learned up here, is, that the built environment, there is a great sort of engine, if used well, to kind of propel those things forward.
Yeah, those are great points. I think also at a simple level, what this equitable future looks like is a general strong sense of community and belonging for all, regardless of what your background or identity is. when diversity and cultural stories are not only represented but celebrated and shared. I think that's really crucial for our context. I would also say when we see that the historically negative perceptions have been broken down and that we can see community for its true, authentic, beautiful self, I think that's when we know that we've made it. And when we see that there's value put in supporting local community-led reinvestment, that will reduce the historic disparities that we're all seeing in our work and that we've been talking about tonight. We want to see everyone have the opportunity to thrive in a healthy, vibrant community. And so that is, in its simplest form, what that future looks like from my perspective. And then specifically making sure that we're constantly using and updating our strategies that allow longtime stakeholders to benefit from the reinvestment that happens here. You know, we don't want to see all of the funding come through this community and you know, have all these outcomes improved, but for it to ultimately displace people that were here. Mm-hmm. So we need to make sure that we're constantly looking at best practices and how we prevent displacement, so that the people that are here originally and have made up this community can enjoy it. And that is really accomplished by involving those stakeholders at the decision-making tables, so they can help inform the planning and redevelopment of their communities. So it will take a lot of time and effort from a lot of different stakeholders, but I think collaboration is key in that work as we keep moving forward.
Amazing. I talked about paradigm shift earlier, and I feel like that this question, related to this question, I'm living a paradigm shift around what it means to have an equitable community, what it means to have an equitable society. Like words like generational wealth and community wealth and community-owned assets. Like I feel like we're all making that up as we go along. Like we understand the principle, like we want that for our community, but how we get there, we're pioneering, because there's the old way of doing things which resulted in this like not equitable society and neighborhood and community, and we named it as being not equitable because of the events of the last few years and beyond. And so now I feel like we're sort of like pioneering ideas on how to create this community wealth and community assets and generational wealth, trying to create opportunities at the city level and at the county level. So it feels aspirational to me, kind of muddy. Like how are we gonna do this? Is this like utopian? I don't think so. I think we can. Especially when there's like bright minds on it. But I think also one of my meditations is to get out of the way. You know, like there's a tsunami of change coming. I feel like I can contribute to it, but also this is my time to listen. And that ultimately will result in this more equitable world, neighborhood, society, country that we want to live in. And then I would also agree with this idea of local ownership. One of my experiences in this neighborhood is that some of the buildings are not locally owned. Some of the bigger apartment buildings, they're owned by REITs in Maryland that are a mailbox, whatever. And engaging a REIT in a community activation like a mural is impossible. But engaging Morgan, the property owner, or the Jungle Theater in some kind of a neighborhood event is possible. And it could be volunteer, it could be financial, it could just be, I'll invite my grandma to it. So that kind of hyper-local connection to our built form can definitely be an engine to this more accessible, equitable neighborhood and city that we want to live in. And really happy to be a part of a community that wants that. Like, I can't imagine living in a municipality that this was not a priority. That would bum me out. So, that's all I got.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Any final thoughts or reflections that you guys have that you want to share? Or?
Thanks to the Jungle for putting this conversation on. If you haven't seen the play yet, it's fantastic. I was able to see it last week and was really struck by all of the very direct parallels to what is happening outside the doors and on the street of, you know, Lake and Lyndale and beyond to what goes on in the play.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, it was so relatable to what we're experiencing, and one of the great things about the play, they really highlighted the relationships between the characters, and I think, I mean, this panel demonstrates it. We all work together. Relationship building is key in this work to keep it successful and moving forward, and thinking of the out of the box at build the plane as we're flying it solutions. So I would just say, like, I'm excited to continue building the plane.
Yeah, my parting thought would be, you were inspired to come here and hear about what's happening in your neighborhood and hear about development. I hope you leave inspired to get involved, whether that is like opening the letter from the city and going to the community event, or, you know, throwing your hat in the ring when it comes to the Kmart redevelopment or the LynLake Street Art Show, or, you know, a mural project. You know, that involvement piece, I think, if you're compelled to show up here, you know, keep that momentum going and be a part of this paradigm shift that we're talking about that can create a more equitable community through development.
I think the play was very interesting. As someone that works in community development, it is much more of a fantasy than I was expecting. There's obviously human elements there, but I do think that the relationships were a key part of the story, and it's never black and white. It's never all about the money or all about the history. And I think that if you can find your place in the process and show up, or if you just listen and not really be so proactive, that's also part of the process, which I think is sometimes not the first inclination, is to sort of use our right to silence or not to speak, right? You can also show up and be present by just listening, and that can be really hard when you want to affect change and you want to solve the problem, and sometimes you just being there listening is part of solving the problem. And then, yeah, I would say, yeah, keep your eyes and ears open for success, because we're working on it, and it's not easy and it's not obvious, but it is being worked on, and so maybe in another 3 years it'll look even more different, and so on and so forth. So
great. Well, thanks so much. Thank you guys all for your time and wisdom, and for all the awesome stuff that you all do for the city. I think I forgot to introduce myself at the beginning, so if you're wondering who I am, I'm Charlie Rybak. I'm with Southwest Voices. We're a local publication that covers the area. You can find our website, southwestvoices.news. So just pretend I said that at the beginning.
Yeah, it's an amazing resource.
And go see 5 if you haven't. It's so good. It's really amazing.
You have to go, it's right here.
Yeah, actually just stay there. Just stay there for a while, and eventually it'll work out. And thanks a lot to the folks from the Jungle for having all this. Thank you very much.